You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin Raw. Today, I'm going to try something a little bit differently. Instead of reviewing one movie, today I think I'm going to try to do like a news roundup thing. And I am joined by Fan Without a Face.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm happy to be a part of the channel, and honestly just happy to be a part of something other than my usual YouTube videos.
Oh, well, I'm happy to have you. You're going to be the newsman for the day.
Well, that should be interesting. I mean, if you want, I can put on a 1930s newscaster accent if that would make it feel better.
That would be entertaining, but it might grow old kind of quick.
It's an option.
Fair enough. It's on the table if we need it. So I guess we should probably just get started. So what's going on in the world of anime news and anime adjacent news?
As far as I can tell, one of the most talked about topics at the very least has been the recent release of Redo of a Healer. More the anime than the manga, as the manga, as far as I know, has been out since at least 2020, but the anime has become quite a hot topic among anime YouTubers, especially. You literally just have to type in Redo of Healer and you can find 50 or 60 different videos from YouTubers with 1 million to 100,000 to 300,000 subscribers all talking about it. Although most of what they say mostly just amounts to, this is one of the worst anime I have ever seen, it's hot garbage, it is the most disgusting thing we've ever seen in my life, and it should go die.
I called it the most controversial, non-controversial anime because the only controversy I see around it is people just talking about how controversial it is. But other than that, it doesn't really seem like anybody cares.
I guess it depends on how you would define caring. I was a little surprised after I saw episode 2 and I thought to myself, well, I already know this is going to cause a big fat stir. And I was honestly surprised that a lot less people were talking about it compared to some other anime. When Rising of the Shield Hero came out, there were, anime websites like CBR and Anime News Network making articles and all sorts of other stuff, treating it like one of the most controversial series out there. Yet when you watch it, it's a pretty good anime, and while it does deal with some subject matter that can be a little questionable at times, it wasn't a bad show or anything, and it hardly had anything controversial in it. Yet this series, surprisingly enough, not as many people were freaking out about it, which I honestly was surprised about.
I think the reason for that is because the show itself is not really mainstream, and I've heard a lot of people describe the show as kind of like an anime version of a 70s exploitation film. And I think that's fair. That's the main reason why you don't hear people talking about it, because it kind of occupies this niche of this kind of very transgressive show. And the only people who are seeking it out are people who want to see it. Whereas, something like Shield Hero or Goblin Slayer, that stuff was more mainstream. That stuff was probably, targeted maybe more to a shonen kind of audience. So you had that crossover. Whereas with this show, there really isn't a lot of substance to the show aside from the sex and the sexual violence. I think the only people seeking out this show are the people who just want to see it. That's why you're not getting this kind of broad outrage or people talking about it.
Well, I mean, I have some theories as to why people aren't talking about it, but I do think that there are people who do want to see it. I think partially because it is both a fantasy series and a revenge story. We've had no shortage of those in different anime. I mean, just in Rising of the Shield Hero, the series spends a lot of time setting up Princess Mine, who is the main antagonist, doing pretty much everything in the writer's power to make us hate this character beyond all measure. She does horrible things to the main character Naofumi, and pretty much by the 3rd or 4th episode, we want to see her suffer like crazy. But the difference is that Naofumi ultimately takes what we would consider the moral high ground, the decision that, I guess, if this was say one of those video games where you have choices, good, bad, all that junk, that he takes the good decision rather than getting his the kind of revenge most people would probably want from him in that situation, torture her, mutilate her, or do something like that. He decides to take the high ground and settles for stripping her of her power and humiliating her. But I think that what Redo of Healer I've seen on several websites and on Reddit, TV tropes, has been referred to as the antithesis of Shield Hero, where instead of taking the good decision, the main character takes the darker path by basically doing every horrible thing that you can possibly imagine to the people who've abused him. And I think part of the reason people want to see it is because we're so used to seeing characters in revenge stories take the proverbial moral high ground where they usually will either settle for doing like minimum amounts of harm to the person who abused them or just killing them really quickly and getting it over with. They're not used to someone doing the kind of horrible things that I imagine some people at least have thought to themselves that if they were in that situation that they would do to these characters that they loathe so viciously. I mean, you just have to look at YouTube comment sections or on other social media where people will sometimes say all the things they wish they could do to people, but obviously wouldn't in circumstances. I feel kind of like that's what part of what this series serves as a purpose of. It's like another type of revenge story where we get to actually see someone engage in some of the stuff that you imagine some people secretly wish that would happen to these reprehensible villains we see in other media.
Sure. I mean, you're kind of talking about a different thing. Mainly, I was talking about mainly just in terms of like the reaction to the show, that the people, like you're saying, the people who want to watch the show are the people who are interested in seeing that kind of story being told. Whereas more mainstream audiences, that's not something they want to see, so they're not watching it. So therefore, that's why you're not getting this kind of broad reaction to the show that you did with those other series.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, there is the fact that there's a censored version and an uncensored version clearly shows that the guys who made the series fully intended it to be for specific, like really late night audiences, like older anime movies, like some of the things that you watch. And I can agree that aside from the creative way it approaches the concept of healing magic and just healing in general in like a fantasy setting, I do agree that it is pretty shallow as far as stories go. It kind of reminded me of Akame ga Kill, but with less interesting characters, because same basic idea. Kid gets recruited to essentially be a quote-unquote hero, but has to do certain dark, questionable things because the government and kingdom is corrupt as hell. Like, it's actually kind of funny, the parallels between like the kingdom in Redo and the empire in Akame ga Kill, because they do a lot of the same reprehensible stuff.
The key difference, I think, between Redo of Healer and Akame ga Kill is that there is a duality to Akame ga Kill that makes it interesting. At the core of that story, you have the Jaegers and then you have the Night Raid. And they sort of parallel each other. And they are interesting in the sense that, like, the Night Raid isn't completely good and the Jaegers aren't completely bad. There's this interesting line of gray between these characters. But what Akame ga Kill has that Redo of Healer does not have is a self-awareness. So there is a lot of instances in Akame ga Kill where characters are reflecting on the things they're doing. I mean, there's that one character, I forget his name, the guy with the flamethrower.
Oh, that's Bowles.
Yeah, there's that one scene when Wave says to him, you're a nice guy. And then he's like, I'm not a nice guy. And then he talks about all the people he's killed and he knows one day that's going to come back to him. And then even the girl who turns into a lion or whatever.
Leone.
Yeah, like even she says that like karma is going to get us or something like that. But there's this acknowledgement that what they're doing is bad and it is going to come back to them. Whereas Redo of Healer, the main character, there is no conflict to him. That's why I don't think he's an anti-hero, because he is just doing what he wants to do and he's just taking sadistic pleasure in doing these horrible things. There is no self-awareness or conflict to him where he says, man, I'm going too far. This is too much. He's just taking pleasure in the darkness that he's doing.
Well, I kind of feel like part of the thing we have to keep in mind is that at the moment there's only been like 7 episodes and the manga is only like, I think 30 chapters long so far, and I think at some point he might reflect on some of this sort of thing, but I also feel like with Akame ga Kill versus this, it's a little different in the fact that, for one thing, Kearu, he suffered for 4 years and at least 6 months of abuse, so if he turned out like even remotely as nice as he used to be when the series started, that frankly would be, well, questionable at best. And let's be honest, the characters in the story are extremely reprehensible people who they do have to face some kind of justice, but because the kingdom that they live in is so utterly corrupt and backwards that we know they're never going to get any kind of punishment for all the horrible things that they do. Plus the fact that most of the bad guys are superpowered heroes who are among the strongest characters in this world, that basically means that Kearu is probably one of the only people who can actually stop them. I admit, he does take it far at times, but at the same time, one thing that's different with Akame ga Kill is that the Night Raid, it showed that they were more than willing to kill innocent people if they had to, whereas Kearu seems to always find a way around that.
Well, there is a cop-out in Redo of Healer because, like, he says he doesn't kill innocent people, but 90% of that world, everybody's evil. So it's like, okay, you don't kill the 10% of the people that are innocent. It's really the least you could expect him to do at that point.
Technically, as far as we've seen, the the evil people are the heroes, the royalty, which, let's be honest, that's pretty par for the course in most fantasy stories. Like I said with Akame ga Kill, pretty much everybody in the Empire who even had a name or any kind of rank in the Empire was corrupt. But in Redo of Healer, for the most part, the bad guys we've seen up to this point mainly just consists of the heroes, Bullet, Blade, and Flare. The King, I think, they haven't really gotten that far in the manga as far as I know, and most of the soldiers, but most of the civilians that we see, they're relatively innocent, so they seem to outnumber the bad guys pretty well.
Technically they do, but in terms of the characters you're exposed to in the story of Redo of Healer, everybody is psychotically evil. And going back to Akame ga Kill, we don't know that the people they're killing are innocent. They're contracted to kill them. We don't know exactly what those people did.
Well, I was referring more to at the start of the series, they basically tell Tatsumi when they recruit him that they basically say, it's either you come with us and work for us as our slave, or we kill you because you've seen our faces. I think it's a safe bet that the fact that they have that as a rule, meaning that they've probably done that more than a few times, and let's be honest, some of the Jaegers that they try to kill aren't evil in the traditional sense. I mean, you've got Waver, the guy who has the same armor, who as far as we
know... No, well, that's the point that I'm making, that there's a lot of gray in there, but with the healer character, there is no gray to him. He's just doing bad things. And the only justification is that bad things were done to him.
But I mean, like, think about other revenge stories that we've seen, like, say, The Crow or Kill Bill. In those stories, we actively root for the main characters, even though they are technically doing reprehensible things to reprehensible people. And especially with Kill Bill, in that movie, the bride flat out tells the first person she has on her list, Vernita Green, that if she doesn't agree to fight her, she is going to murder her husband and her daughter, and probably every person that Vernita has any kind of a connection with, regardless of whether or not they had anything to do with the attack that ultimately led to the whole revenge spree, and yet somehow she's still seen as the hero of the story and an anti-hero in some respects.
The key difference here is the degree that he's torturing people, like with Flare. That's what makes him a bad guy. I mean, he is going over the line. Very simply, if you are torturing somebody and laughing maniacally, you are probably a bad guy. You know, like I can't think of any anti-hero who is ever torturing somebody and laughing maniacally while doing it. That's the problem, is he crosses the line into full-on villain. This is the thing. This is how you rewrite that Flare scene and make him an anti-hero. If he went to her room and then he breaks her fingers and then he tells her to strip and then he says to her, you want to know what? I was going to do horrible things to you, but just looking at you now, I realize what a pathetic person you are and you're not even worth my time. And then he turns around and he gets ready to leave. Then you have Flare pick up a knife and go to stab him and then say like, oh, I knew you didn't have the guts. And then as she's about to stab him, he grabs the knife and then he goes into a fit of rage and then he attacks her. And then after he's done attacking her, he says to himself like, you know, what have I done? Why did I do this? I can't let her go because she's going to try to attack me again. I have no choice but to erase her memory. It's the only thing I could do. If you do that with the character, you're making him much more sympathetic and you're giving him a conflict versus just, I'm going to just do these horrible things to you because I want to do them.
I think part of it also is that for starters, you have to remember that he was tortured for 4 years and 6 months. And we see exactly what that entailed. Flare herself allowed him to be, well, raped by men and women for God only knows how many years. Then she used him for her own gratification. Not to mention allowed both Bullet and Blade to abuse him in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. So it's pretty obvious he's not exactly mentally stable, so...
He's not mentally stable and he's becoming a full-blown villain. I mean, look, Eric Draven was killed. He stabbed Tintin and then he,
shot Funboy up with all that.
He shot Funboy, T-Bird, he blew him up. He didn't prolong his torture of these characters and then laugh maniacally as he was doing it. I mean, that's the thing. At some point in your revenge, if you take it too far, you have now crossed the line. That's what I'm saying too. Like, even the show itself, like the way the show is structured and the way the show treats him, if they're trying to make him an anti-hero, they are failing. I think the show only works if he's a villain.
I don't know. I guess it's just kind of, at least to a little extent, it's kind of hard to feel sympathy for for Flare to an extent because of all the things that she allowed to have happen to him and how much twisted glee she took in it. I guess I do agree that he has taken it pretty far, but at the same time, you also have to consider the things that she did to him and, well, what exactly would have been preferable to just...
Well, he becomes an unsympathetic character as well. I mean, that's part of the reason reason why the show to me isn't all that interesting, because it's just a bunch of horrible people doing horrible things to each other.
I do agree with that, but I guess at the same time it is just kind of interesting to at least see that, considering we're so used to characters just being benevolent good guys for the most part, who take the high ground all the time.
I guess what I will say about the show, what I will say about Redo of Healer, is that I don't necessarily find it all that interesting, but I do like the gratuitousness of it, because, I just rewatched Mad Bull 34. Mad Bull 34 is filled with just a bunch of random sex scenes that are just out of nowhere, and that's the one thing I do like about Redo of Healer, is that it is kind of bringing about the kind of like that kind of gratuitous vulgarness of like old school OVAs. So I think that's pretty cool about the show. I just wish the show had a little bit more substance with its characters and try to present a little bit more conflict.
I do agree that it would have been more interesting if there was a little bit more of an exploration of the cycle of, like, perhaps Kearu either develops like because he's so psychologically damaged, he develops like a twisted split personality. He has like multiple personality disorder, like Sensui from Yu Yu Hakusho, or maybe he is just, every time he does something horrible, he's like overwhelmed with guilt and he hates himself, but at the same time he finds himself questioning whether or not it's right or fair to feel guilty for punishing these awful people who, if it was up to like all the other civilians and citizens and everything else, they'd probably say they were too light on them for everything they've done.
So what else is going on in the world of anime news?
Well, one thing that especially if you pay attention, if you're looking on like say Facebook or social media, is a lot of talk of the Demon Slayer movie, the Mugen Train arc, which has been making a frankly ridiculous amount of money, especially for a shonen anime film. From what I've heard, it's now made over $400 million worldwide, and that's a lot more impressive than you think, because in Japan, it is actually the highest grossing film in their entire country's history, beating out movies like Spirited Away and Titanic. And that is frankly insane when you think about it.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive.
It actually gets a little bit more impressive when you also factor in that Demon Slayer is now a crazy high-selling manga. According to at least some of the articles I was able to find, in 2020, it managed to sell over 82 million manga copies worldwide, which is more than One Piece, which only sold 7.7 million, and just for reference sake, the highest-selling comic for that year was only sold 200,000 copies, so it's actually beating out both manga and American comics in overall sales. So
the show is a great show. I've heard people complain about like the pacing issues with Demon Slayer, but I don't think it's paced poorly at all. I think actually it has some of the most masterful storytelling I've ever seen. I mean, that first episode of Demon Slayer is awesome, and especially like the first couple of minutes where he's running with his sister. Any like lesson to somebody who wants to be a writer or a filmmaker, that is the way you begin your story. You begin it in the middle with action and intrigue, and that beginning has everything.
I do agree that Demon Slayer is an interesting story. I've actually read the manga all the way through, just so you know, so I'm a bit more versed in how things are going to progress. And while I do agree that some parts of it are interesting, the animation is good, the characters are pretty likable, and the demon concepts are pretty nice, as the story progresses, especially later into the arcs and in the manga, you do start to see there are a couple of problems that can be distracting to you if you think about it for too long.
Like what?
Okay, like a lesser issue, that some issues that I've actually seen were mentioned in some videos. One of them, a YouTuber by the name of Just Stop, he actually did an in-depth review of Demon Slayer's problems. One minor thing is that after the final selection arc, we're told that there are in total 10 ranks for Demon Slayers, and that the main characters, Zenitsu, Inosuke, and Tanjiro, are at the lowest rank. The problem with that, though, is that unlike in, say, Bleach, where you can clearly see the difference in strength between the different ranked officers and captains, or like in Naruto with like the difference between a Genin, a Chunin, and a Jonin, the ranks are almost superfluous, since unless the Demon Slayer is either the main characters or the Hashira, they're basically cannon fodder. There are virtually no Demon Slayers outside of the Hashira and the main cast who are worth anything, and it kind of makes the whole ranking theme seem kind of superfluous.
Yeah, I guess I don't know, that doesn't bother me. that seems like a weird thing to single out as a problem with the show.
Just seems kind of weird to introduce like a ranking system, like especially a 10-tier ranking system. I mean, why not just make it like your low level, mid level, or a Hashira? That's it.
I'm assuming it's probably like supposed to be analogous to like belts in martial arts, like a white belt, belt and a yellow belt and a green belt.
I guess another thing I felt was kind of wasted potential was that the concept of demons being, possibly being good or turning good. We know with Tamayo and Nezuko that it is actually possible for demons to either fight against their demon instincts or maybe change their ways if possible, but outside of them, we never really see that happen. We never see any demons feel regret or feel like maybe they should change who they are or even consider the idea of becoming human again.
Honestly, that's one of the things I like about the show, because when we start with Tanjiro's sister and we think she's special because she's not feeding on people, but then we start to find out within the world there are good demons. And then even in the flashback to, what was it, that guy Rui, and the family he had, and the one girl was being chased by the demon slayers, and like she was made out to be sort of like a sympathetic character in that sense. So you do kind of get the sense that like the demons, there's this like circular logic to it where like the demons are bad so we treat them bad, and from the demon perspective we have to be bad because people treat us bad. It's this confirmation loop. I think that creates a lot of intrigue in the show, and I haven't read the manga, but with the TV show we're still very early with the story, so we haven't encountered that many demons to say, well, it's really unusual that there are good demons.
Trust me, it's not something that gets explored very much. It is looked at somewhat, but let me put it to you this way. Pretty much most of the demon slayers became who they are because they had some kind of a negative encounter with demons. Tanjiro, some of the Hashira and everything, it's elaborated more in the manga. Whereas the demons, almost every one of them, especially the Kiseki or the 12 demon moons, most of them became demons as a result of the cruelty or mistreatment of done to them by humans in one way or another, and yet none of the demons ever seem to question, no one ever seems to really question that. Like, none of the demons say, why are you killing us? And they go, well, you're killing and eating humans. And they'd be like, yeah, but humans kill other humans all the time, and sometimes they do worse stuff than we do, so what makes us any worse than some humans?
In terms of the animation, the anime, it doesn't really bother me, but if you're saying it's not really explored in the manga, then I guess that could be an issue.
Some of the characters are very likable, and some of the demons especially are very likable. Either that or they're just so deliciously evil in the sense that you can't help but like them just because of how much they revel in how evil they are. But at the same time, it just kind of feels like they could have explored the concept of like, are demons as evil as everyone thinks they are, when you consider the fact that many of them became demons not because they were evil to begin with, but because of the cruelty and evil of humans.
Yeah.
With season 2 coming out, you'll get at least a little bit more of a glimpse into that, because that does explore it a little bit more.
Well, I will say the thing I kind of find a little weak with the show is the convenience of the plot sometimes. Like that one part, I think it's when he's fighting Roy, and then he suddenly remembers this breathing technique his father taught him. It's like, well, that's incredibly convenient that your father taught you this technique that you forgot about right up until this moment.
I think it's a little bit more convenient that it just so happens to be useful in this situation.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. But that's a problem I see with a lot of shonen manga, where the seeds that should have been planted earlier just come out of nowhere. Like that whole thing with the breathing thing, if that was introduced 10 episodes before, it would have been a great payoff. But because it comes out of nowhere, it just seems so fucking random. But that's a problem I see with a lot of shonen manga, and I think it's because the monthly aspect of manga and the way it's plotted out. A lot of times these things are being made up month to month, and they don't have we want to think they have a clear storyline of where it's going. That's not always the case. A lot of times comic book artists have a vague notion of what they want to do, but they don't start fine-tuning these details till they actually start writing the issue. And so you get these inconsistencies like that.
Yeah, I definitely feel like some clearly have a plan, like Oda with One Piece, because it's honestly kind of amazing sometimes the little details that you can pick out even after you've read, like, dozens of chapters of One Piece, or My Hero Academia is pretty good too, but then there are other shonen manga like Fairy Tail, which is just like a hot mess of plot convenience and all sorts of other things. It honestly gives you a freaking headache, and it definitely is to be expected with a series where they basically have to make a chapter a week, which I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. So I guess you do have to kind of at least accept a little bit of, you have to suspend your disbelief just a little bit with some of the problems and just try to enjoy it a little bit, but there should be a limit.
just going back to the movie, how did they fit an entire manga arc in 90 minutes? How long is the movie?
It's about the same length as your average shonen-based movie, about 90 or so minutes. Although, if I remember correctly, the Mugen Train arc is only a couple of chapters long, actually, for the most part. You have to keep in mind that Demon Slayer is only about 200 chapters long, I think, and contrary to some series like One Piece where they stretch like one chapter an episode, usually a single episode can consist of maybe 3 or 4 chapters, so it's not that crazy to think that they could fit an entire arc into a single movie. I'm just more surprised that they actually, rather than just making an arc up like they've done for other series, they actually decided to use an actual arc from the actual series that, is part of the canon storyline.
I guess that's good or bad, depending how you want to look at it. I mean, I guess it's bad in the sense that, like, you can't just jump right into season 2. You have to watch the movie before you watch season 2.
I have heard some people talk about how this might be open with it being so crazy successful. This is probably going to open the door for other anime to try something similar.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, and especially with Demon Slayer becoming so popular now, it has basically become like this huge anime for a lot of people. Though I think that has at least partially to do with the fact that it was put on Netflix not too long ago, like during this whole pandemic thing where people basically have to rely more on streaming services. So they were able to like binge watch the hell out of it, and with the movie on top of that, it was like the perfect storm to get as many people exposed to this series as possible.
The quality is there too. It's a solid show. Like it is a good show.
I agree. It does also help that rather than like some other shonen like One Piece, Naruto, or Bleach, where they basically release an episode a week, they're doing things more like My Hero, where they basically break it down to like 26 episode seasons, so they're able to keep the animation quality more consistent or improve on it.
The trailer to the movie looked pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that. What else is going on in the world of anime news?
Well, we know Godzilla V Kong is coming out later this month, which I'm looking forward to that quite a bit.
Have you seen the original one, the one from the 60s?
Are you kidding? I used to rent that like every other week from Blockbuster.
So we know that there's probably not going to be King Kong fighting an octopus in this movie, being that he already fought an octopus in Kong.
Huh, yeah, that was less of a fight and more just one-sided butt kicking.
That scene is pretty cool. I mean, the scene with the octopus, because they use a real octopus, I mean, that is a pretty creepy scene when the octopus is attacking the village.
That was pretty cool, though it is also kind of funny when you think about the whole medicine thing, because I'm pretty sure that in the original Japanese, they were just giving him booze.
It was like a narcotic, like it was like a berry or something that they were liquefying.
Yeah, they said it was some kind of berry medicine.
The weakest thing about the original King Kong versus Godzilla is that Godzilla and Kong don't really fight till like the last 10 minutes of that movie.
Well, to be fair, let's be honest, like older Godzilla movies weren't exactly known for having the most engaging storylines. It was mostly just set up to watch the two guys in suits beat the hell out of each other.
But that's the problem with that movie, is that movie is mostly just setting up this fight that happens in the last 10 minutes.
Oh, I think part of that might have been because they didn't really know how to make the fight seem balanced. I mean, you got to remember that they were matching Japan's most famous monster against America's most famous monster, and maybe they kind of were worried they'd make the fight seem unfair or one-sided, or they were worried about pissing off one audience or the other. I'm honestly not sure, to be perfectly honest.
I guess it could just be part of that old school movie thing about like just building tension. When you watch a lot of like 70s movies and 60s movies, there isn't a lot of action, and it is really just building tension, and it's more about the prelude to the action than the action itself.
I definitely noticed that, and like I'm a big fan of old Universal monster movies like The Mummy and The Wolfman, and they do spend a lot more time on setup, although that could also just be because with all the makeup, it's kind of hard to do a lot of action scenes with that back in those days.
But I think this is something the new Kong vs. Godzilla will rectify. It looks like, at the very least, there's 2 fight sequences we see in the trailer. We see the one on the boat, and then we see one when they're in the city.
And there's also the fight in Kong fighting other monsters too, but yeah, I definitely doubt they're going to spend as much time on the human characters like they did in the first Godzilla and back in 2014. I think they've learned by now that people don't want to watch the human characters, they just want to watch the really cool monsters beat the living hell out of each other and break stuff all across the country.
In a fight between King Kong versus Godzilla, who do you think would win?
Personally, I think Kong can win.
I would have to agree. I mean, I'm a huge Godzilla fan, but if we're going to think about like original Godzilla, right? Like, so like 1954, he's a sea monster out of the ocean. If he's a sea monster out of the ocean that was just evolved from like natural circumstances, and he's fighting a giant gorilla, I would imagine that the gorilla would probably have the advantage because it would almost be like a gorilla fighting a crocodile.
Yeah, plus you also have to factor in that because Kong is a gorilla, he has longer, larger arms and is more dexterous, meaning that he can actually, punch Godzilla and choke him and pick him up and throw him. Godzilla's arms are stubby and he can barely grab anything with those things. So he's basically reduced to just biting Kong, hitting him with his atomic breath, and smacking him with his tail.
Yeah, Godzilla has no upper body strength.
Yeah, he's got the upper body strength of a T-Rex, I guess, which is none.
This is if we're talking about the original Godzilla. If we're talking about Heisei Godzilla is Godzillasaurus that has been exposed to radiation. He has that direct contact with radiation, so he is radioactive. In Godzilla vs. Destroyer, he melts from that radiation that's in him. So I think original Godzilla, King Kong could probably beat Heisei Godzilla. I'm gonna go with Godzilla because he is radioactive, and whatever Kong's strength is no match for the radiation he is emitting.
I don't know, the whole radiation thing with Godzilla has always been crazy and consistent. I mean, if Godzilla was really as radioactive as they say he is, then that would basically mean that every single place that he ever goes to would essentially be the equivalent of Chernobyl. Remember in Godzilla King of the Monsters, the newer one, when Professor Serizawa, Ken Watanabe's character, once he gets close to Godzilla and his radioactive home, even though he's wearing a suit and is in like that tube that should at least somewhat protect him, he still struggles just to walk a few feet over to him. Yet in all the other Godzilla movies, there are people literally standing like just yards away from Godzilla and nothing's happening to them.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I would have to say that maybe it fluctuates, as we've seen, in Destroyer, where it is literally melting his body. So, I mean, we know it's something he could tap into with his atomic breath. I tend to think that his radiation kind of comes in waves where it's stronger and then it's weaker in certain instances, but it's definitely something he could harness. And if we're talking about burning Godzilla, okay, where he's directly radioactive, that Godzilla could totally kill King Kong.
True, but you have to factor in that that's a unique state that he can't just turn on and off like a light switch. In Godzilla vs. Destroyer, that was literally because he absorbed a buttload of radiation that was basically overheating his body. And the same thing happened in Godzilla King of the Monsters, where he needed to both absorb a nuke and then also absorb like that dust stuff from Mothra to be able to access that version of burning Godzilla. It's not just something that he can turn on and off. And I'm saying this because I saw that one episode of How It Should Have Ended where they show that exact scene of Kong approaching Godzilla looking all tough and pounding his chest, and then Godzilla does the whole radiation wave and turns him into a skeleton, and then as a result Kong just runs away like a little pansy. And I'm like, yeah, except we've never been shown that Godzilla can just turn that on and off. I'm pretty sure it's like a one-time deal kind of situation.
So you're going with King Kong beats all versions of Godzilla.
I'm not going to say he beats burning Godzilla, I can say that.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it also comes down to certain things that Kong has as advantages. We know that he is not an idiot, contrary to how he acts. We know he's pretty smart, and we know that he can use weapons, which is a pretty big deal when you consider that a lot of Godzilla's enemies, like the monsters he fights, don't have opposable thumbs. Like, have you ever noticed that? Like, Gigan has hooks for hands, King Ghidorah has no hands, Rodan has wings, so he's not grabbing anything with that, and Geras doesn't have thumbs or anything else. Kong's like one of the only ones that can actually pick something up and smack Godzilla over the head with it.
That is true.
You have to wonder if maybe in Kong vs. Godzilla, if they're going to do something like how in the original movie, Kong got like a jump start from a lightning bolt. Like, I'm still wondering how the hell they thought that one up.
Yeah, he has electric powers. That is so weird.
Well, apparently from what I've been told, the movie was originally supposed to be Godzilla vs. Frankenstein.
Yeah, that makes complete sense now, where like when King Kong is passed out and the lightning strikes him and he awakes, if he was supposed to be Frankenstein, that actually completely makes sense now. I actually just always thought that like they figured Godzilla had atomic breath, so they got to give King Kong something, so we'll give him electric powers.
Well, I mean, it also kind of makes sense when you consider the fact that Godzilla is the byproduct of basically a man-made accident, whereas Kong, as far as we know, he's a natural creature. He was born that way. So I guess whereas Godzilla draws his power from radiation, which is more of a man-made thing, Kong draws his power from nature.
That is true. What is our final story of the day?
On the last subject on the agenda today would be the Mortal Kombat trailer that came out not too long ago.
What did you think of the trailer?
I thought it looked pretty cool. I'm not big into fighting games, mostly just because they become so combo focused and seem to be geared more towards those esports guys who get paid and who spend like 12, 14 hours a day playing the game, and so there's no way you can win. So you basically have to dedicate a lot of time to it, but I always did kind of like the lore and the story, and it looks pretty good, though there are some things in the trailer that have me raising a couple of eyebrows about it.
Overall, I think the trailer looks promising. There are some things that are kind of weird. I mean, some of it does look a little like fan filmish. There's a couple of shots in there that I remember I saw screen caps of it, and I didn't realize that was the actual movie. I thought it was a fan film, and I was like, oof, that looks a little cheap.
If you've seen Mortal Kombat Legacy, that's cheap, because the Sub-Zero in that one basically looks like he's walking around in paintball armor and a ski mask. At least in this version, he actually looks like a ninja.
Legacy was the one that was on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
I hated that. I fucking hated that. Because everyone would talk about like, oh, it's awesome, it's so dark. Like, I don't give a shit how fucking dark that stuff is. That show sucked. Like, I hated that show.
Yeah, I was disappointed because the very first episode they made, where they tried to take things on a little bit more of a realistic approach, where the main bad guys like Reptile and Baraka weren't demons or monsters, they were just crazy serial killers and mutants. I thought that was an interesting angle to approach it, but then it's clearly like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that. We're just gonna drop it and go straight into all the video game stuff, but we're gonna do it with like the budget of like your average cosplayer.
The whole like Cole Young thing, like this new character they invented for the movie, I'm afraid this guy is gonna be the focal point of the film, and you're gonna see Liu Kang for like 10 minutes.
You know what? I bet you $100 it's gonna turn out that this Cole guy is actually the younger Sub-Zero. I don't know if you're familiar with the games, but the Sub-Zero we're seeing is...
I'm not familiar with the games. What are you talking about? I guess I know there are two Sub-Zeros. The original Sub-Zero died, and his brother becomes Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat 2, yes.
I'm thinking that this guy they're showing is probably going to end up being revealed as like the good Sub-Zero, you know, the younger brother who isn't a colossal dickhole like his brother Bi-Han, the one we see in the trailers.
That would be pretty cool if they try to tie him into, if they reveal he's actually someone relevant to the lore of the canon of Mortal Kombat. But if he's just a random dude that they made for the movie, I think that sucks.
Yeah, that'd pretty much be like Mila Jovovich's Alice in Resident Evil, and God, I hate those movies.
The Resident Evil movies, I like them if you don't think about them as Resident Evil movies. As just weird zombie movies, I think they're kind of fun.
But yeah, I'm thinking that that's what they're probably going to do, that this Cole guy is just going to turn out to be the younger brother of Sub-Zero for whatever reason. He's in Earthrealm for some reason, because that would make a lot of sense, and the trailers do seem to focus a lot more on Sub-Zero than they do on Liu Kang.
Well, Sub-Zero is my favorite character, so I liked that about this trailer. That's what always bothered me about the original Mortal Kombat movie, that Sub-Zero kind of got the shit end of the stick and he was just kind of there. He didn't really do much.
Well, you have to remember that in the first game, they only had like 7 or 8 characters and they hadn't really ironed out the lore yet. And at that point, Sub-Zero was essentially just a ninja who could freeze stuff.
He killed Scorpion. That was still in the original game. The Lin Kuei, that was all in the original game. I think the reason they did that in the movie was just because they were 2 ninja characters, and just for the sake of like writing a screenplay, it's easier just to say, okay, these 2 ninjas work for this guy. I appreciate that in the movie they explain why that is, because Shang Tsung has taken over their minds. So I mean, that to me was a nice nod to the fans. Like, it was respectful to the lore of the games, because they could have just easily just said, fuck it, you know, they're just his henchmen. But they at the very least acknowledged the fans as saying, oh no, these guys are enemies, but Shang Tsung is controlling them.
Well, that's certainly better than what they did in Annihilation, where they gave Sub-Zero like a 5-minute cameo.
There's so much wrong with Annihilation. That's like besides the point. No, I like the fact that there's a lot of Sub-Zero stuff in here. I like the fact that Raiden is played by Tadanobu Asano, who was Kakihara in Ichi the Killer. I think it's pretty cool to see him with a big role in a Hollywood movie.
I got to admit, I was kind of partial to Mr. Lambert in the original movie. I think it was mostly just down to the voice, because it was so distinctive sounding.
Well, you know, Christopher Lambert is the Highlander, so he was pretty cool as Raiden.
There can be only one.
And it is funny too, because like even in Mortal Kombat 11, Raiden was a white guy.
Well, technically you have to remember that he's a god, so he can basically look like whatever the hell he wants, so it's not like he's obligated to look like any one race.
is Raiden an actual thunder god? I don't think he actually is he?
I think he's made up, because if we're going by Japanese mythology, there is a thunder god, but his name is, it's Raijin, not Raiden.
Well, it's close, I guess.
There might be someone called Raiden in, like, maybe Chinese mythology. I'm not as well versed in that, but I also just feel kind of like they're called the elder gods, and they're not called, like, the elder gods of this particular religion or mythology. They're just called the elder gods, and I kind of feel like that basically means they're the gods of Earth Realm, so really having them be played by, they could be played by just about any ethnicity and it would feel fine, I guess.
The mythology of Mortal Kombat is this weird quasi-Asian lore. I don't think it's based in anything that's really real, because it doesn't sound anything like Shintoism or Buddhism. It sounds almost like Norse mythology almost, just mixed with Asian mysticism.
Well, I mean, Raiden is a thunder god, so...
I appreciate that Asano is playing Raiden in this movie. I think he's a good actor. I liked him in Ichi the Killer, and I like the fact that he is Raiden in this movie.
I do think Scorpion looks cool, who is my favorite Mortal Kombat character, by the way. Although I have to admit, his classic "get over here," it sounded kind of weak.
It did sound a little strange, yeah.
Yeah, you could barely understand what the hell he was even saying. It sounded less like he said, "Get over here," and more like, "Get over here." I'm hoping maybe they fix that when the movie is actually released or something.
I guess we'll find out. Well, anyway, I think that wraps up our news video. Face, I appreciate you being here, and thank you for participating and reading the news. And that wraps up this segment. So this week's question comes from Checkered Slime, who writes, "Hey Paul, love your YouTube videos. I recently got into Guilty Gear and was wondering, what are some games you think would be awesome as anime? Keep it up, man." Thank you, Checkered Slime, for sending a question, and I'm glad you like the videos. And congratulations for getting into Guilty Gear. Guilty Gear is not only a kick-ass fighting game, but it also has the greatest video game soundtrack of all time. I know there's a new Guilty Gear game out. I think it's called Guilty Gear Strive, which I have not played yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out. Daisuke Ishiwatari, probably like one of the most talented men alive, composed the music to Guilty Gear, designed the characters, designed the game. I mean, that guy's a true fucking hero of mine. I think he's got to be like one of the most talented people in the world of video games and anime. But in terms of what fighting games do I think should be made into an anime, I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there that already exist. Street Fighter, the animated movie, is awesome. The Darkstalkers anime is good. And I think the Virtua Fighter anime is awesome. And I feel like it's something people don't really talk about. It's really overlooked. I love the relationship between Pai and Akira in that anime. It's really cool. And you want to know what? I could have sworn there was a Guilty Gear anime. I remember seeing one, and then I went on Google and I searched for it, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, wait a minute. I swore I saw a Guilty Gear anime. I could have sworn one existed, but I can't find any evidence of its existence. Now I'm really creeped out. I'm wondering if I'm remembering an alternate timeline or something. If there isn't a Guilty Gear anime, there fucking should be. How could there not be one at this point? But in terms of like what fighting games would make great animes, I think one of the first ones that come to mind is Red Earth, the fucking forgotten Capcom fighter. Red Earth needs an anime, and it needs a fucking home port. Why there hasn't been an official release of Red Earth is beyond me. But as soon as they do that, they should totally make a Red Earth anime. I would love to see those characters in anime form. Leo and Tessa are awesome, and it's about time they get the appreciation they deserve. I'd like to see a Primal Rage anime, too. I think that would be really cool. But the one fighting game that I really want to see in an anime, I want to see Masami Obari's King of Fighters. I want to see a follow-up to Fatal Fury the motion picture. Masami Obari has never really made a follow-up to Fatal Fury the motion picture, and I think it is about time that Masami Obari makes a King of Fighters anime. I would love to see it directed by Obari. Obari is the SNK guy. I love his character designs. I think his character designs are better than Shinkiro's. And there's something about the way Obari draws characters that fits Fatal Fury, and I think the greater world of SNK. And I really would love to see Obari tackle King of Fighters. I believe he's doing a short film to promote the upcoming King of Fighters game, which is fucking awesome. But yeah, that's all I got to say about that. Thank you once again for sending in a question. question. If anybody else has a question out there, if you want to make a suggestion about a topic, if you want to argue with me about something, whatever you feel like talking about, just send me an email at studiochojin@gmail.com. Make the subject RAW, and I will read it on a future episode of this show. If you've sent in a question already and I haven't read it, I promise you I will get to it. I will read everybody's question. So that wraps up this week's edition of Studio Chojin Raw. I want to thank you for clicking on the video, and I want to urge you to hit the subscribe button and join the unholy army of the night. If you want to support this channel, you could always like the video, you could share the video, and hey, I have a Ko-fi account. I'm an independent artist. I'm an independent content creator. I have no sponsorships. I'm going to be self-publishing a comic in a couple of months. If you want to support an independent creator like myself, I have a Ko-fi account. Or you could always just tell a friend, share the video, or you could just watch the video and send positive vibes. So, once again, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.